Okay, so you know how we love it when you all send in the stuff that really gets you thinking, right?
Absolutely.
And, this time around, we got some absolute gems about concentration in golf. I mean, come on, who hasn't been out there on the course totally losing their focus, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Every golfer's been there.
And I mean, these sources you send are amazing. We've got like insights from some of the biggest names in golf. We've even got a little bit of neuroscience thrown in there.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to unpack this because, you know, when you think about it, concentration really is like the foundation for everything in golf, isn't it?
It totally is. I mean, how can you possibly hit a good shot if your head's somewhere else, right?
Right. And what really fascinates me is that concentration isn't just this on or off thing. Like sometimes you're focused, sometimes you're not. It's way more dynamic than that. It's how our brain filters what we pay attention to, and that filtering process is constantly changing.
That's so true. And that's actually what really jumped out at me when I was reading through what Nicholas had to say. I mean, he describes his focus as something that shifts constantly during a shot, even between shots.
Okay.
So what's he say? Well, he talks about starting with this like broad awareness when he's walking up to the ball, kind of taking in the whole scene. And then as he starts analyzing the shot and getting set up, his focus narrows down. It peaks like super sharp during the swing itself.
Makes sense.
Right. And then as he walks to the next shot, it broadens out again.
Okay, so it's like this constant ebb and flow of focus.
Exactly, like a focusing lens that keeps adjusting.
And I think it's really interesting that he mentions that the return to that like relaxed, wider awareness after an approach shot isn't quite as deep as it is after a tee shot, you know?
Oh, yeah. What do you think that is?
Well, I think it's probably because with an approach shot, the green and the next shot are still very much in his mind, still part of that immediate picture.
That makes sense. So it's
Yeah.
not just random then, is it? It seems very intentional.
Yeah. He actually says his pre-shot routine starts way back at the yardage marker. So that routine becomes like a trigger.
To narrow the focus.
Exactly. It's a
Yeah.
signal to start shutting out distractions even before he gets to the ball.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. Now let's switch gears a bit, because one thing that really stood out in all these sources is this idea that concentration isn't just like a nice to have, it's like a defining trait of champions,
I'm with you on that one.
We've even got Larry Bird, the basketball legend, saying that the thing he struggled with most in golf was actually his biggest strength in basketball.
What is crazy focus on the court?
Exactly. He said that kind of tunnel vision focus that works so well for him in basketball just didn't translate to the golf course.
Hmm. Interesting. So maybe it's not just about being able to focus, but about being able to focus in the right way for the right sport.
Right, like the type of concentration you need changes depending on what you're doing.
Makes sense. I mean, in basketball, everything's so fast-paced and reactive, right? You need to be constantly alert and adjusting your focus. But golf, it's more about these bursts of intense focus mixed with periods of relative calm.
Right, and then there's Paul Easinger, who talked about how before his illness, he felt like he could just out-concentrate everyone else on the tour.
Wow, so he actually saw concentration as a competitive advantage.
Totally. And then he talked about how after he got sick, he really struggled to get that back to regain that same level of mental sharpness.
Yeah, that just goes to show you how fragile concentration can be. It's not like you either got it or you don't. It takes constant work, and it can be affected by all sorts of things.
And then Byron Nelson just comes right out and says it. He says, concentration is standard equipment with all champions.
Okay, preach it, Byron.
And he even goes further. He says, you can have all the talent in the world, all the perfect swing mechanics, but if you can't focus, you're going to lose to someone who might not be as naturally gifted, but who can really lock in mentally.
So he's saying concentration. It's like a multiplier for your skills.
Exactly. You can have all the tools, but you need focus to actually use them effectively. And, he actually blames losing his incredible winning streak on a loss of concentration due to mental fatigue.
Ah, so he basically ran out of mental gas.
Exactly. It's not just about being able to focus for one shot or one round. It's about being able to maintain that mental stamina for days, weeks, even years.
That's a whole other level of mental toughness.
And Gary Player really emphasizes this whole mind over matter thing in golf. He says it's absolutely essential to have all your attention on the present shot and nothing else. He even talks about playing entire rounds without being aware of his score because he was so locked in.
Wow, that's some serious focus. It's almost like he's describing a form of meditation.
Right, and he makes it clear that reaching that level of concentration takes years of practice and that it can be lost pretty easily.
So it's a skill you have to keep honing. You can't just assume you've got it and you're
Yeah.
good to go.
And it all comes down to self-discipline, right? Consistently training your mind to stay focused on what matters.
Absolutely. And, the sources you sent in actually tie this into some really fascinating neuroscience.
Yeah, I love that part. They talk about this waking brain system that's located in the brainstem.
Okay. And what's that all about?
Well, it basically acts like a filter for all the sensory information that's constantly flooding our brains.
So it's like our brain's spam filter for information.
Exactly. It helps us prioritize what's important and ignore all the distractions. And they make this great analogy to reading a really captivating book.
You get so engrossed in the story, you totally forget about everything else.
Yeah, and that's because your mental filter is working perfectly, blocking out all the irrelevant stuff. And then they contrast that with how a lot of golfers play.
Yeah, which is how a lot of us probably live our lives too, right? With our minds constantly buzzing with random thoughts.
Totally. And that's why it's so hard to be truly present and focus on what we need to focus on.
It's like the difference between just showing up and actually being engaged, you know?
Exactly. And when we talk about being in the zone or in a flow state, that seems to be what's happening, right? That filter is working perfectly, blocking out all the distractions so we can perform at our best.
Right, it's like everything just clicks into place and it feels effortless. But, it's not always that easy, is it?
No, definitely not, especially when the pressure's on.
Right, because when we get stressed or anxious, that waking brain filter actually becomes less effective.
Less effective, but shouldn't it be more focused when we need it the most?
Yeah, that's what you'd think, right? But actually, it's kind of the opposite. It's like our body's alarm system kicks in, and suddenly our brains are hyper alert to everything, even stuff that doesn't really matter.
So instead of focusing more, we actually focus less.
Yeah, it's like our mental spam filter breaks down, and suddenly we're bombarded with all these thoughts and worries about our swing, the outcome, what other people are thinking.
And that makes it way harder to actually concentrate on hitting the ball.
Right. And that's why those high pressure moments on the course can be so tough to handle. It's like trying to have a conversation in a super loud, crowded room, you know? It's almost impossible to focus on what the other person is saying with all that noise around you.
So it's not just about being able to focus, it's about being able to manage that stress and anxiety so it doesn't totally hijack our brains.
Exactly. We need to find ways to calm that alarm system down so we can think clearly and execute our shots.
Okay, so we've got a pretty good understanding of what concentration is, why it matters, and even how it works in the brain. But how do we actually put this into practice? I mean, what are some specific strategies that top golfers use to stay focused out there on the course?
I think you're going to love this.
Lay it on me.
Well, the most common one almost every pro talks about is this idea of one shot at a time.
That sounds so simple, almost cliche, but it's obviously got to be more than just a saying, right?
Oh, yeah, it's way more than just a saying. It's a deliberate mental strategy. And Fred Couples, he's a great example. He talks about how instead of focusing on winning the whole tournament, he breaks it down and just focuses on playing one hole at a time.
So instead of this huge, overwhelming goal, it becomes a series of smaller, more manageable challenges.
Exactly. And it's not just the guys who do this. Sherry Steinhauer, she talks about how in a final round, she had to force herself to just think about the shot right in front of her and not get ahead of herself.
Yeah, and Carolyn Hill, she said she spent years training herself to just focus on moving the ball from point A to point B, nothing else.
So they're all intentionally blocking out the noise, the past mistakes, the pressure of the future, and just zeroing in on the task at hand.
Makes sense. And Ilberto Morales, he actually credits winning his junior world championship to this one shot at a time focus.
Wow. So it works at all levels.
Yeah, and Mike Hill on the senior tour, he talked about consciously practicing being more alert and focused, even in the early rounds of a tournament when the pressure's maybe not as high.
So it's not something that just happens. You actually have to train yourself to do it.
Right, and Patty Sheehan, she used it to get herself back on track after a bad start. And even Jack Nicklaus, he said the more tense he felt, the more he focused on just that one shot.
So even the best of the best, they still have to work at this.
It's not automatic for anyone, but it's also pretty amazing how quickly you can lose focus even when you're playing well.
What are you thinking of?
Sam Snead, he tells this story about a Ryder Cup match where he had a big lead and he started mentally celebrating, like ordering a steak dinner.
Oh, no, he got ahead of himself.
Yeah. And he ended up losing the match. It's like the golf gods were punishing him for being cocky.
I love his takeaway, though. He says, never collect any trophies in your head until you have them in your hand.
That's a good one. And then there's Arnold Palmer at the U.S. Open with a 7-stroke lead.
Oh, yeah. What happened there?
Well, he started thinking about breaking a scoring record and bam, just like his concentration was gone. He lost the whole tournament.
So it's not enough to be able to focus. You have to be able to maintain that focus, especially when the pressure's on or when you start getting ahead of yourself.
And that brings us to this idea of patience, which is a huge theme in all these
Okay,
sources.
how are they defining patience in the context of golf?
They describe it as a combo of focused concentration and this ability to redirect any thoughts that aren't about the shot at hand.
So it's not just passively waiting for things to get better, it's about actively managing your mental state.
Exactly. And they link this directly to mental toughness.
That makes sense because being patient on the golf course, it takes a lot of mental strength, doesn't it?
Definitely. I mean, think about Sam Snead's story about hitting 3 balls out of bounds in a practice round.
Oh, yeah. And George Fazio just calmly tells him to hit another one.
And what does he do?
He puts it right on the green.
Exactly. And that's the lesson, right? Never give up mentally after a bad shot. It's so easy to let one bad shot turn into 2, then 3, and so on.
Yeah, it can spiral out of control really fast. And Snead actually said that letting yourself give up mentally can become a really bad habit.
Like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. And then there's his win at the Westchester Open after hitting 3 balls out of bounds on one hole. If that's not a testament to patience,
Yeah.
I don't know what is.
And it's not just Snead either. Craig Stadler and Jack Nicklaus both attribute big wins to being patient on the course.
So clearly, patience is a key ingredient for success.
And they give this really practical advice for us weekend golfers. They say, when you hit a bad shot, don't immediately start analyzing your swing.
Yeah, just take a breath and focus on the next shot,
Exactly, because dwelling on the past, it just leads to more frustration and less focus.
which is the exact opposite of what you want.
Now, here's another really interesting concept. They talk about realistic performance expectancies.
Okay, I like where this is going.
They use this analogy of a soda machine. You put your money in, you expect a drink, right? It's a 1-1 expectation.
Yeah, makes sense.
But they say a lot of golfers go out there with that same kind of unrealistic expectation. They expect to hit a perfect shot every single time.
And when that doesn't happen, they get frustrated.
Exactly. And that frustration leads to what they call decay, which is basically this gradual decline in your performance because you're not getting the results you expect.
Ah, so it's a vicious cycle.
Totally. Frustration leads to worse performance, which leads to more frustration, and so on. And then they ask this really thought-provoking question. How many bad shots or missed putts does it take for your concentration to start to waver?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
It's like, what's your personal frustration tolerance level?
Exactly. And then they share this incredible insight from Jack Nicklaus. He said even at their best, he and Ben Hogan only expected to hit a handful of perfect shots during a round.
Really? So even the greatest golfers weren't hitting perfect shots all the time.
Nope. And Walter Hagen, he supposedly expected to hit 7 bad shots every round.
Wow. Talk about managing expectations.
Right. And that's the point they're making. If you go out there expecting perfection, you're setting yourself up for disappointment and frustration.
And that's going to kill your concentration.
Exactly. But if you have realistic expectations, if you accept that you're going to hit some bad shots, you're less likely to get rattled and lose your focus.
So it's about shifting your mindset from perfection to consistency.
And Meg Mallon, she had this really relatable experience of playing great on the range, but then totally losing it on the course.
Yeah, I think we've all been there. It's like you can hit the ball perfectly when there's no pressure, but then you get out on the course and it all falls apart.
Exactly. And that's because there are so many other factors that come into play, right? The pressure, the different lies, the speed of the greens.
It's a whole different ball game.
And then they dive into this thing they call the distance disease.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's that all about?
It's this obsession with hitting the ball as far as possible, especially among male golfers.
Yeah, we've all seen that guy in the tee box swinging for the fences.
Exactly. And they say it's this tendency to compete with your playing partners who hit it further.
Which leads to swinging too hard, getting tense, and ultimately hitting worse shots.
Totally. And they tell this really sad story about Kenny Knox, who was paired with John Daly.
Long John Daly, that's a tough pairing for anyone's ego.
Right. And Knox talks about how he started trying to keep up with Daly's distance, and it totally messed up his game.
It took him out of his own game.
Yeah. He even says, the field that you have, that's how you play the game. I really have lost that ability to play the game.
It's like he forgot how to play his own game trying to be someone else.
And they have this great reminder, remember what you feed attention grows.
Meaning, if you focus on distance, that's what you're going to get more of. But it might come at the expense of other important things.
Exactly. And they point out how golf advertisers really play into this obsession with distance, you know?
They're always pushing the latest and greatest driver that's supposed to add yards to your drive.
But as Jim Dent, a former long drive champion, found out, it's actually chipping and putting that really matter most for scoring well.
It's those scoring shots around the green that separate the good players from the great ones.
Exactly. And they have all these examples of top players like Ben Crenshaw, Corey Pavin, Tom Kite, who were all relatively short hitters, but incredibly successful.
Because they excelled in other areas,
No.
they were great putters, they hit a lot of fairways, they were smart about course management.
And Monty Scheinblum, another long drive champion, he set a course record with his short game, not his driver.
So even the long hitters, they still need a good short game to score low.
And Dennis Paulson, he had this experience where his putting made the difference between shooting a record-breaking score and a much higher one.
It's all about those little shots.
And even Jack Nicklaus and Gary Player, they won majors without being the longest hitters in the field.
So distance isn't everything.
Definitely. And they share this tip that Peter Thompson got from Sam Snead about slowing down your downswing to actually hit it further.
It's not about swinging harder. It's about swinging smoother.
And they remind us about Nicklaus's swing key maintaining the same pace on the downswing as the backswing.
So consistency is key.
Exactly. And they also recommend practicing with light grip pressure.
Less tension, more feel.
Exactly. And when you're on the tee box, focus on the fairway target and the feeling of your practice swings, not how far you want to hit it.
So it's about shifting your focus from outcome to process.
Okay, so if we're not obsessing about distance, what should our realistic performance goals be?
Well, they give some interesting stats from the 1995 PGA Tour.
Oh yeah, what do they say?
Well, the top players were averaging around 10 to 13 greens in regulation per round.
Not even hitting every green.
Nope. And in putting, even the best players were only making about half of their putts from 6 feet.
Wow, that's humbling.
Right? So it's about having realistic expectations and not beating yourself up when you don't hit every shot perfectly.
And they say it's important to always expect to make the putt, but also to accept that you're going to miss some.
That way you don't get too frustrated and lose your focus.
And they have this really interesting piece of advice. They say, when you hit a bad shot, take another swing right away.
To reinforce the good swing memory.
Exactly. It's about getting back to the positive and not dwelling on the negative.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about managing our own expectations and reactions, but what about the external distractions? Like what other players are doing?
Well, Ben Hogan, he had a really unique approach to this. He would completely ignore his competitors and just focus on the course.
So he was all about controlling what he could control.
Exactly. He even walked the course backward during practice rounds to plan his approach shots.
Wow, that's commitment.
And Kelly Booth, she had this experience where she consciously shifted her focus from the other players to the course, and it really helped her performance.
So it's about staying in your own lane, not getting caught up in what everyone else is doing.
And Hogan, he was so focused that he reportedly ignored even amazing shots hit by his playing partners.
He was in his own world.
And that's the takeaway, right? Focusing on the course helps you stay present and avoid all those distractions that come from comparing yourself to others or worrying about your score.
It's about playing your own game, not someone else's.
Exactly. And they suggest that we should treat ourselves on the course like we would treat a good friend.
With patience, understanding, and encouragement.
Exactly, because beating ourselves up, it's not going to help anyone.
Right. It just makes it harder to focus and enjoy the game.
Okay, so we know that concentration is crucial on the course, but they also emphasize that it's a skill you can practice off the course, too.
Like training your mental muscles.
Exactly, and they give some really cool exercises for this.
Oh yeah, like what?
Well, one is goal setting without deadlines.
So you focus on the task itself, not the time pressure.
Right, and when those distracting thoughts come up, you just acknowledge them without judgment and then gently redirect your focus back to the task.
It's like training yourself to be more mindful.
And they also talk about practicing mindfulness in your daily routines.
Like paying attention to the sensations when you're brushing your teeth or taking a shower.
Exactly. It's about being fully present in the moment, even in those mundane everyday activities.
And then there's this cool exercise where you shift your focus back and forth between broad awareness and narrow focus.
So you're training your brain to be flexible with its attention.
Right. And finally, they talk about this exercise where you focus all your attention on a specific sensation in your body, like the feeling of your toe.
Yeah, that one's really interesting. It's like a demonstration of how powerful our attention can be.
We can literally choose where to direct our focus.
Okay, so let's sum this all up for our listeners. We've explored what concentration really means in golf, how it's not just about staring intently at the ball, but about this dynamic process of shifting your focus, managing distractions, staying present, and understanding your own mental patterns. We've looked at the mindset of champions, the importance of taking things one shot at a time, and the crucial role of patience and realistic expectations. We've also talked about the dangers of getting obsessed with distance and playing against your competitors instead of playing the course.
And the good news is that these aren't just abstract concepts. They're practical skills that anyone can learn and improve.
So here's a final thought for you all to ponder until our next deep dive. Think about which aspect of concentration might make the biggest difference for you right now. Is it managing your expectations, staying more present in each shot, or practicing focus off the course?
Try experimenting with just one of those things in your next round and see what happens.
And most importantly, have fun out there.
Always.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a blast.
See you next time.
See ya.